I think we started recording. Yes, we have started recording. Awesome. Okay. Hi. Welcome. Uh yeah. Hi. I'm Mateo. I am a BC First Peoples 12 student from Deep Cove. And I wanted to start this off by acknowledging that we are coming together today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations. And they have stewarded and cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial and continue to do so today. We are incredibly privileged to live, work, learn, and play here. And I'm here today to talk about Indigenous land rights in BC, provincial government consultation, old growth logging, and how all of these connect. And if anyone has any questions, you can either unmute your mic, speak up, you can use the raise hand button thingamajig down there, or closer to the end, I will also have a formal questions period. So let's get this underway. And rather than just talking about it for 40 minutes, you are also going to submit a comment on BC's forest operations map to suggest expanding a retention area for a proposed logging operation. So what's the problem? Growing up in BC, I kept hearing acknowledgements of how we were on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish, Musqueam, and Squamish nations. I've probably heard this for over 11 years now. And honestly, until like 3 weeks ago, I never really knew what it actually meant. So I thought it'd be important to describe what it actually is. And unceded territory means that First Nations people never legally signed their land over to the Crown or Canada. And that's interesting since this technically means that unceded territories are legally the land of their respective First Nations. Oh, hang on. Oh, here's Rod. All right. However, the Canadian government also holds ultimate sovereignty over the land in Canada. And therefore, although around or over 95% of BC is unceded territory and First Nations do technically own their lands, BC can authorize resource extraction without consent. Here's just a quick diagram, a map of BC, just to give you an idea of how the unceded territories are broken up. Um, you guys see that if I zoom in? Yeah. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're down here. Go Salish. I don't want to screw up any more pronunciations. Yeah. So now we're going to move on to talking about DRIPA, or the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. So BC unanimously passed DRIPA into law in November of 2019. And as I'm sure you all know, something unanimously passing does not happen very often. And it was based off of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, or UNDRIP, which was adopted in September of 2007. Here's a photo of it in one of the government buildings down in Victoria. It was a super cool historical moment since BC was the first province in Canada to adopt UNDRIP into law. And this piece of legislation introduced the intention to gradually implement several fundamental rights for Indigenous peoples across BC. DRIPA declared several foundational rights, such as the right to autonomy or self government, conservation and the protection of the environment, the productive capacity of lands or territories, and most importantly, in terms of this presentation, free, prior, and informed consent. And in Section 4 of DRIPA, they originally note that the government must prepare and implement an action plan to achieve the objectives of this declaration. And this is important because this tells us that this legislation was put in to get the ball rolling on the implementation of a better defined scope of Indigenous rights and aligning them with relevant laws in BC gradually, not all at once. But in December 2025, the BC Appeals Court in Gitchla, I probably botched that, Gitchla versus British Columbia, deemed the agreement and deemed the government's obligations under DRIPA as legally enforceable. This appealed the 2023 decision that DRIPA was not legally enforceable, which in a way it wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be adopted gradually. And now moving on to old growth logging, BC once had over 25 million hectares of old growth forests. And that's almost the size of New Zealand. Fun fact. You may be wondering what's so special about old growth, and well, it comes down to a few key considerations. Some things old growth trees do are providing wildlife habitats, stabilizing points of ecological activities such as streams. They also hold large amounts of carbon, and they do a whole lot more. If I sat here and talked about it all day, that'd be a really boring Zoom meeting. In the lumber market, one reason old growth is preferable is due to its much tighter packed rings. This creates much more durable and rot resistant wood. For example, hardwood floors, very helpful. Um, and also, many Indigenous groups find old growth forests deeply sacred for ceremonial purposes, traditions such as building totem poles, and for maintaining a connection with the land. 24% of BC's exports come from forestry, and the forestry sector supports more than $9 billion in wages, salaries, and benefits. Here's a bit of an infographic just to give some more perspective on that. I'll only show that for a few seconds, but as you all know, forestry is a very big deal for our province. And that's great. Lumber, like I just said, is a very important part of our provincial economy, as it should be. However, old growth of trees are not quickly replaceable. For a tree to be considered old growth, it has to typically be at least 250 years old. And with old growth trees significantly contributing to local ecosystems, culture, and acting as guardians to ecological activity, shouldn't they be protected? And now for how old growth and land rights connects, due to the nature of unceded territory in BC, virtually all of BC's remaining old growth rests on Indigenous lands. And this means for old growth logging to occur, the province has a duty to consult with First Nations before any logging operations take place. However, there have been claims in the past that this consultation has not been meaningful as it should be. And for example, with the Fairy Creek blockades that happened a couple months ago. And recent events such as the recent events are threatening the continuance of meaningful consultation being a requirement for major economic projects. And in many cases, the British Columbia government is actively prioritizing economic projects over consent and reconciliation. We see examples of this in Bill 15, a piece of legislation that helps fast track major economic projects that are in the interest of the province, and more recently with the possible revision of DRIPA. And this shows real risks across the board. And in terms of progress, deferrals do happen. This is when stretches of forest are temporarily protected whilst First Nations and governing bodies are making decisions around what will happen with them. Uh, Here's an old map from around 5 years ago to give you guys an idea of priority deferral areas. The BC doesn't publicly share their latest ones for reasons I do not remember. Um, yeah, that's a very interconnected system that even I don't fully understand. But these are a step in the right direction. But honestly, we don't really know what will come out of it. The BC government notes on their website that their focus is now on finalizing long term management plans for these areas. And beyond that, we don't really know what's happening. Maybe these areas will become fully protected, or maybe they will go back into the hands of logging companies and end up as cut blocks on the province's forest operations map. And for why this matters, I gotta admit that the world is a pretty scary place right now. And some of the reasons behind old growth logging still being underway and the threats to DRIPA make sense. They do. I understand that securing Canada's economic stability or solidifying our position as a reliable, forward looking nation on the world stage is within public interest. I'm not saying it isn't. However, and I'm sure you've heard this many times before, we only have one Earth. And as we know, our old growth forests are exceedingly important and unique to the Pacific Northwest. And this raises an important question. Why does the province repeatedly sideline reconciliation and Indigenous rights the moment they become inconvenient for large scale economic projects? And for what we can do, that was a lot of information I just told you. You were exposed to many new ideas during the this past 15, 10 minutes. And as I was planning this little workshop out, I wanted us to also make an effective action that results in positive change rather than me just talking at you guys for a really, really long time. And that's not helpful to anyone. And I pondered how we could do this for a while. And I found that the best way for us to positively affect old growth logging right here, right now, is by submitting comments to a pending forest operation. But before we do that, I really quickly just wanted to point out two other ways we can have a positive impact on Indigenous land rights and old growth logging. First one is to share your knowledge. A lot of what you learned about today isn't really widely known or understood, especially Indigenous land rights. And even sharing what you know can help shift public understanding and perception. And the second one is emails. If you ever want to learn more about this or you want to voice your opinion, email people. I'd especially recommend emailing your MLA as they're supposed to represent your views and they're most likely to respond. Fun fact, they are especially likely to respond if you include your postal code in your email, which I did not, which is why my MLA Susie Chand has not emailed me back yet. So that's a pro tip. They tell you that after you send the email, not before. And anyways, moving on to BC's forest operations map. For a few years now, BC has hosted an online forest operations map, or FOM, to improve transparency over forestry operations and take in public comments. And we'll take a look at one that will take place in Northwest BC, just north of Terrace. Here's a quick little screenshot of the interface to give y'all a better idea of it, and along with the red circle up where the operation will take place, just north of Terrace. And the operation, which number is 3127, is focusing on sorry, I completely botched that. The operation is focusing on harvesting old growth. Now, to their credit, there are a few planned retention areas for logging, and they aren't exclusively harvesting old growth. However, they are still harvesting old growth. I put together this map using IMAP BC. I cross-referenced the proposed cut blocks on the forest operations map along with BC's projected vegetation ages to show that, as you can see, there is some encroachment into what is likely old growth. As I may or may not have mentioned earlier, old growth is typically at least 250 years old. And although these proposed cut blocks go into spots that are in the mid 150s, they do also cut into this patch here that's over 280 years old, and this patch that's a little over 250. And with our newfound knowledge, we'll write comments advocating for the expansion of their wildlife tree retention areas to specifically protect the old growth stands in this block. And I'll give a really quick tutorial on how to leave a comment, then I'll show you how to write them. And this hopefully will not explode when I turn to screen sharing. And for whatever reason, because Microsoft Teams sucks, my camera might turn off. Let's see, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay, we can see my screen now, I hope, maybe. Yes, maybe. Okay. I immediately started by Googling the wrong thing. Okay. So I will also provide a direct link in chat, but for now, we are in the exact same interface. And if we zoom in up here, north of Prince Rupert, north of Terrace, you'll see FOM number 3127 by Canada Resurgence Developments Limited. If you click view details, you can scroll through this a bit. You can zoom in to take a look at the proposed cut blocks and roads. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see the ID of each retention area and cut block as you are able to comment on specific cut blocks. But for our purposes, I will direct you to this big blue button right here that says submit a comment. What you'll do is you'll just click submit a comment. You'll agree to the terms and conditions. You'll go next. You don't have to enter your contact information, I'd recommend entering at least some of it, whether it just be your name and where you're from, just because I like to think it legitimizes your comment a bit, although they pay attention to all comments. Then next you will write your amazing comment, right? Then you'll just click submit. But if I go back to Teams now that that amazing demo has been given, hopefully you guys saw that. That would have been really bad if you didn't see it. Let's see. Okay, no, camera back
Yeah, I
on.
saw it.
Okay, perfect. Then, okay, gonna go back. I'm gonna open my PowerPoint back up. I'm gonna hope it gives me the option to skip forward to where I just was. Otherwise, we're gonna have a real awkward 30 seconds of me quickly scrolling through a presentation. The button is there, but because of how amazingly designed this Microsoft Teams app is, I cannot click it. So we're gonna have the pleasure of me quickly going through the slides right here. Hopefully the presentation's going pretty good for you guys right now. We're not doing that bad for time. I gave 7:45 as a rough benchmark of how long I thought this would take, including everything with some buffer time. We are almost there. I'm almost not needing to kill time anymore.
Matteo, can I
And
ask a question?
yes, please. I will try my
Uh,
best to answer it.
With this cut block,
Mhm.
how do you know what consultations they've done with First Nations in that area?
I don't, because I'm not entirely sure myself the steps of how they take. It's not readily publicly documented. It may have
Okay.
already happened, or it may happen once the government gives a bit more of a green light based on the forest operations map. I did reach out to the Minister of Forests asking some questions, and he has yet to get back to me. I talked to his assistant Caleb. He was really nice, but I cannot answer that at this time. But during the
Okay.
Q&A period later, I am more than willing to screen share me Googling it and us figuring it out together. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I figured the best way to streamline comment writing within the bounds of this workshop was by having you mix and match to create a knowledgeable and most importantly, reasonable statement. So here's a screenshot of my blog, which I will send in just a minute or two to give you guys an idea on how this will go. You will have 3 steps, so 3 sentences, and you'll be able to choose one of 3 sentences for each section to put together a little comment that you can submit. And these are just a starting point. It's totally up to you how you would like to do it. You can add some more writing, you can adjust some of the phrasing, or you can just choose what you want, paste it in, and submit it. It's completely up to you. And I just want to remind us that the entire point of BC creating this FOM was for public input, which is why each comment is recognized and seriously thought out by both the logging companies and our provincial government. And before BC gives these loggers the green light, they will need to address any public concerns. There's a QR code on the screen, which if you're not using the same device you can use to get to my blog. I'm also going to paste a link in chat in just a second. And on that link, there you go. And on that link, you can choose your sentences. And at the bottom of the page, there's a link to the forest operations map that takes you directly to that. What am I thinking? You know, that exact same operation, 3127. And I'm just gonna skip forward. Okay, yeah, that's not relevant yet. So I just put that link in there. You guys can open it and get started on your comments. I'm gonna go to screen share and I'm just gonna share my screen. I'm gonna put a little timer up. And also if we have any questions like the one that Marcia just asked, which we can research while we're writing our comments, that's exactly what we're gonna do. Okay, so let's see. If I go back to share screen, start broadcast. Okay, let's go over to Safari. I will put on a 6.5, let's say 6.5 minute timer. There you go. If you need any uh, urgent help, if you can't find the thing, something blows up on your end that I can help with, I'm more than happy to help. But I want to redirect to Marsha's question and from earlier. Marsha, can you remind me your question as we're working on this?
Yeah, it was how you
Mm.
know if they've consulted First Nations on this particular cut block.
Okay. Um, okay. I'm sure you guys will love seeing me Google this in real time. Okay, in the BC Forest Operations Map, does BC consult with First Nations before or after proposed guidelines? Let's see. Let's figure this out. Okay, according to our AI overview, which source is gov.bc, BC consults with First Nations before any proposed cut blocks are approved. Forest agreement holders in the province are legally required to engage with Indigenous communities. Yes, they are, as per DRIPA and the duty to consult. And this is during the early operational and landscape planning stages to share information before the cutting permits are finalized. So, yes, yes, the BC government did reach out to them before. And the reason why I reached out to the Ministry of Forest in the first place is because this process of consultation isn't very clearly defined, especially because it can vary so differently because meaningful consultation can mean so many different things. Unfortunately, the Minister of Forests has not provided me a comment yet. Because everyone here is roughly within my circle or my dad's circle. If I ever do get a comment, which I will, hopefully, I will definitely share that comment with y'all. Um, yeah, no, I have a couple minutes left. I don't think we really need a timer. Any other? I'm gonna turn my camera back on in a second. Any other questions? Awesome. Alrighty. Um, quick audience participation. How's people's comment writing going? Is it going good? Going bad?
Is there a way to
Hmm.
see your like I'm not able to make a comment and copy and paste from your comments at the same
Yeah.
time.
Oh, you want me to screen share the thingamajig? I can do that.
I don't know if that
Mm.
would make any difference, but
They're not super long, so you can also, clickety clack type it.
yeah.
Just turn my screen share back on. Let's go to the blog. Let's see. There we go. You can just give me a heads up when to scroll down to step 3.
Oh,
And
that's
another
okay.
important you still sorry?
I am on my phone, so I can't see that. I'll just take pictures of
Oh,
the comments
okay.
and text them
And
in. Thank you.
Hazel also in the chat wrote down a quick tip for that. But anyways, another reason to supply at least one piece of contact information when you're filling out your comment is so you can get updated on the status or so they can reach out to you with follow-up questions because these questions are seriously reviewed and like I said, the logging companies have a duty to respond to these questions, however that may be, before BC can grant them the green light.
I have a
Yeah.
quick question.
Yes.
So based on like what I see here, it's still basically speaking of like traditional logging methods.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious of how does like our current how does it match or mesh with our current climate changes, as in for best forest fire preparedness management, as in aside from the logging, but like
Mhm.
selective logging, spacing, thinning out.
Yeah.
So when a big, even you protect a fantastic large section of old growth forest, but
Mhm.
when there's a large fire
Yeah.
and like a rank 5, rank 6, and then it jumps to the crown, and they're so tight and so
Mhm.
big, is is that factored now into this kind of forestry practice?
I would say it's likely. Unfortunately, the forest operations map doesn't necessarily say why something is being logged. It just shows us who's logging it and where.
Okay.
As for information, I didn't have enough time to do this, but you can always reach out to the office of the offices of whoever's logging it, because context varies heavily when it comes to forest operation map proposals. Since I'll just use an example. While I was looking for a pending operation to use an example for when we can comment on, I found an operation in northern BC that was logging almost exclusively old growth trees that were over 300 and even 400 years old. However, as I did some more research into the logging behind it, it turns out it's an indigenous owned practice. And although they didn't necessarily say why they were logging it, their website had a ton of information on how they log and more into the sustainable methods they use. And
Excellent.
I did email them because that was a really good case study of how it's not necessarily black and white with logging in BC, and they have yet to email me back yet. However, yes, I can confidently say that not all old growth logging operations are necessarily bad. It heavily depends on context, and that's context I wish we were more publicly given, but we are not. And to go more into your question about more specifically forest fires and other natural things that happen in for methods of logging, I know that some methods like clear cutting are, and do know my information may not be 100% accurate, but I know that methods for logging, such as clear cut logging, although they may harm some of the ecosystem in a way, sometimes they are necessary because they significantly cut down on forest fire risk. So there's always a lot of factors that you need to consider with logging, and unfortunately, these aren't especially well documented, and they vary significantly. Well, because while I was researching for this, I was planning earlier on to do couple slides more on logging methods in specific, but I wasn't able to in the end do it because of how much information varied among so many different places, both here and with American logging companies, because they're logging the same trees we are ultimately, especially in Oregon. But I wasn't able to find enough consistent information for me to understand it enough to bring it up in our presentation. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Matteo, you
Gonna turn that.
mentioned
Yes.
that we're supposed to leave our contact information for responses
Mhm.
to our comments. Would you
Yeah.
recommend any follow-up resources to research more and be able to respond to those responses?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, one really great way to learn more, especially more specific requests or questions, is to email people within our government, such as, like I said, our MLAs. But other than that, especially for more wide information on, let's just say, logging or old growth logging, there are countless sites that I have looked through that have so many articles about their logging practices. So that's always a really good place to learn some more common methods within the industry. And as for Indigenous land rights, unfortunately, it can be quite difficult to digest. I tried really hard to read Drippa, but I couldn't get through it. But luckily, there's a lot of coverage about this in news outlets, especially more recently because of Drippa, because of the BC Appeals Court making Drippa legally enforceable. For example, the narwhal is a fantastic. Um, I forgot what the term is. You know, when you don't have to pay for your newspapers. They're one of those news outlets. It's just called the Narwhal. They're run all over Canada, and they have fantastic articles on old growth logging, DRIPA, and wildfires, fire suppression. I couldn't recommend them enough to learn more about it. And I can also put that link in chat right now if you guys want. It's just the narwhal.ca. They're probably one of my favorite news outlets just because they write stuff on all the stuff I'm interested in. But yeah, I'll also put my email in the chat actually in case any other questions come to mind. You can email me and I'm more than happy to figure out an answer to your questions and hit you back. Yeah, and as this presentation is kind of coming to a close, are there any more questions? No.
No questions, but you did a great job. It was
Thank you.
very, very good presentation.
Yeah, it was super informative. I really learned a lot tonight. Thank you, Matteo.
Yeah, of course. And this is also being recorded, so I will post it to YouTube and via various channels, also known as my dad. You will get a link to this YouTube video at some point or another. Hazel, I will just text you the video link, and it would be so awesome if you guys could also share this with anyone who wasn't able to come tonight who might be interested in learning about this. So thank you for that thumbs up, Hazel. So thank you so much for coming. I hope you all learned a lot, and I hope our comments will lead to either more acknowledgement on the BC government's part that old growth logging is still happening, and it's not just amazing logging companies like that Indigenous owned one I mentioned that I couldn't pronounce even if it was life or death. And that corporate players are still logging this, and also how logging isn't necessarily so black and white, and there's so many perspectives that unfortunately we don't get to see, especially if we don't look for it. And yeah, so I'm gonna stop recording now if I can figure out how to do that. There we go. Thank you so much. Yes, I am stopping the recording. Thank you so